Welcome to the Stories Told podcast. This is episode 93, Everyday Joy. This is the Stories Told podcast. Two authors talking about stories in movies, TV, and of course, books.
I'm Michael Grayford. I write action-adventure stories in fantasy and sci-fi worlds, sometimes for younger readers and sometimes for adults. And I try to always inject at least a little bit of humor.
And I am author E.W. Barnes, and I write action-adventure, time travel novels, and space opera science fiction. Thousands of years, thousands of worlds. But be forewarned, beyond here, there will be spoilers. Are you ready for the adventure? Let's begin. Welcome back to the Stories Told podcast. I'm author E.W. Barnes, and with me is author Michael Grayford. And today we're talking about the story told in the film Wall-E. How you doing today, Mike? We're coming back from a little bit of a hiatus because you got to go on a fabulous vacation. How was your vacation? How are you doing?
Yeah, I did. It was great. I went to Thailand for a little bit. It's
Cool.
swimming and snorkeling and surfing and checking out the area, seeing movie locations at islands and things like that. Yeah, very beautiful country, very nice, friendly people there. It was a good trip. I really enjoyed it.
Glad. I'm very glad. Podcast went on hiatus, so I've just been pulling things together for the end of the year. As this is being recorded, it's over the holiday period in 2024, so it gave me an opportunity to just sort of do some family things and prepare for the holidays. So it was a good little hiatus for me as well.
Nice.
So I'm assuming you didn't get anything done in your writing world while you were traveling?
No, I didn't do anything specifically with writing. My second book is still with the editor, so I'm kind of doing something indirectly in that sense. Hopefully work is being done at a distance. But no, I didn't do anything specifically. How about you? Were you working on writing stuff?
I've been working on promotions stuff mostly, as we have mentioned, as of the recording of the podcast. So after this publishes, I will no longer be Ubering for a few weeks. And so I'm actually preparing as far as mentally and sort of all the materials that I need and just getting ready to continue working on Meridian, which is the third book in my Adventures of the Empyrean Guard series. But in the meantime, there are some really cool end of the year promotions coming up that I'm going to be putting both the first book of my time travel series, that's going to go on Amazon for free towards the end of the month, and the prelude novella for the Adventures of the Empyrean Guard will also be available through this promotion. And that's going to be the last week of December, I think. So if anybody's interested in that, of course, we've mentioned this before, but you can sign up for my newsletter. And that definitely goes out with my newsletter information. And I try to post like little notices, this is coming up or this is happening on the community posts here on YouTube. I do it on Facebook, though. That's pretty much all I do on Facebook. So my newsletter is a much better place to get regular updates. I don't do much on Facebook anymore. And of course, my Patreon, that also gets updates on a regular basis. So that's what I've been working on, is just coordinating all those promotions.
Yeah, good.
While you were traveling, did you encounter anything that influences your understanding of stories? We talked a little bit before we started recording about how storytelling doesn't just stem from that which we consume, the books and the movies and the television, but also what we experience. And so I was curious as if there's anything that you encountered that you might find influencing your storytelling.
Yeah, definitely. There's always stuff whenever I take a vacation that I'm thinking about in terms of stories, in terms of like the events of my life, right, is one thing. And then also in that location. So things that happen to me, things that you see, and also talking about other people, talking with other people. It was a group trip, so there's other people on the trip with you, and you're going on these different experiences and excursions. So learning about them and what they're doing. One of the things I always try to think of when I'm on a trip is what's something weird that could happen or supernatural. Like what kind of gods do these people study, or what kind of mythology do these people have in this location, or what kind of monsters are, they come up with in these areas, things like that. So I love thinking about that kind of stuff. And if there's nothing that I learn specifically, it's like I kind of tend to make up things in my head. So I'm always thinking about that kind of thing. Another thing that was I didn't realize when I went there, there was a massive earthquake in 2004, which resulted in huge tsunamis. And I
Oh,
remember
yes.
that impacting Indonesia, which it did. And it also impacted India, and Thailand was one of the places as well. And in
Yeah.
particular, Phuket, which is where I went, they got hit really hard, flushed a huge part of that place. So that was pretty awful. I didn't realize that was there. So that was very sobering.
Yeah.
Going there and seeing reminders of that, and seeing, now of course they have sirens up and signs everywhere for evacuation, things like that. But there are people who lived through that, were there, and just hearing their experiences, and it's just a horrible, horrible thing. Hundreds of
Yeah.
thousands of people died from that one event. So things like that, they take the fantasy and fun out and put some more seriousness to your trip and to your thoughts. But that's good too. I mean, that's part of life, unfortunately, but
And
something
it
to be
becomes
reminded
part
of.
of the story of the place, of the
Yeah,
location.
right. Yeah, it's indelibly linked to that now. So that's part of it. That, like you said, that's part of the story of Thailand and that area. So that was
Yeah.
something that was there too. And then the travels. I often get sick when I travel because of exposure to new germs, things like that. Whether it's on the plane or whether it's food you're eating, things like that. So I got a little bit sick coming back from the trip.
Yeah.
Nothing too bad, but that's nothing to write about because it's fairly common, and no one wants to hear about that. But yeah, no, I definitely think about these things. I have thought about possibly doing a book or a series at one point about each of the locations I've been, or a subset of the places that I've traveled to, with creating some kind of mystery or supernatural element in that location, kind of just to have fun with it. So I always think about that when I go to different places too.
All right. That's cool. That's actually very cool.
We'll
I
see.
did not do much in the way of consuming of entertainment in the last couple of weeks. Mostly, as I like to say, watching charming British people make desserts
Excellent.
on the Great British Baking Show. That's pretty much
Yeah.
been it. Just enjoying that because there's just something relaxing about that.
Yeah. Have you seen that
Yeah.
show, Is It Cake?
Yeah, I have. I think that's so clever.
I don't know how they make those things. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's incredibly clever. I agree. So, are you ready to talk about Wall-E?
Yeah, let's talk Wall-E.
Today we're talking about the story told in the movie Wall-E, and I'm going to read the synopsis that you can find when you type Wall-E on Google. Wall-E, short for Waste Allocation Load Lifter Earth Class, is the last robot left on Earth. He spends his days tidying up the planet one piece of garbage at a time. But during 700 years, Wall-E has developed a personality, and he's more than a little lonely. Then he spots Eve, a sleek and shapely probe sent back to Earth on a scanning mission. Smitten, Wall-E embarks on an adventure when he follows Eve across the galaxy. Did you like this movie?
Yeah, I did like this movie. I remember enjoying this when it came out. I saw it in the theater, but not being blown away by it. And I haven't seen it since then until we watched it for this podcast. And I thought I might be bored a bit watching it again, but I actually found it quite engaging. So yeah, I enjoyed it even on the second watch. There's a lot of subtlety here. There's a lot of nuance, which I think works really well. I love how Wally has such a personality that shines through in everything he does. This could have been so drab and so dreary at the start, and it kind of is when you think about it. But the way they present it, they do such a good job. We see that he's friends with a roach. We see that he likes music and old timey movies. We see that he's a collector of things. He's clever enough to fix things on his own. And then, of course, we see that he's a romantic from the movies. And then when he meets Eve, I think they set that up really well. And I thought that the relationship was developed surprisingly well, especially in terms of seeing Eve coming to care about Wally, because he, like you said in the description, he's smitten pretty much immediately, right? He's got this romantic side of him from watching these movies, I guess, and this loneliness that has kicked in over the years. But it takes Eve a while to come around to him, which is good. That's smart. And I love the way that they develop that. It starts slowly, and then by the end, we get to see some really interesting, sweet moments. And there's so much emotion portrayed in just how they say each other's names at different points in the movie, right? There's the fear and concern, just there's so much going on. And then like when we get to the point where they have the space dancing scene overlaid with, the captain requesting the definition of dancing, like what is that? And then we see them getting around each other outside. That was just brilliant. I loved how they did that. And then I like at the end how all the messed up robots, the little defective robots, get together and help them. Even the glitching umbrella helps them at the end. I thought that was funny. And I thought it was really smart to have Wally's repair / salvation being tied to return to Earth, right? He couldn't get the parts that he needed where he was, and it could only be done on Earth. So he had to go back to Earth, and Eve had to take him back to Earth, in addition to the humans going back to Earth. So I like how they tied all that together. And overall, they somehow made a fun story in a very dystopian future. The dystopia hits on a lot of things everyone would recognize today and could be very bleak, right? Pollution, obviously, automation, sloth, consumerism, monopolization, screen addiction, like all of these things they hit. And, we can still relate to these things today. If anything, a lot of them are even worse now. So this could have been very bleak. And it kind of is if you look at it at a high level. But they managed to make it a fun, engaging, entertaining story. And I thought they did it pretty well. I was impressed. How about you? What did you think? What did you like about this movie?
I have seen this movie multiple times, but this is the first time I sat down and looked at it through the lens of a story. And I was blown away what good storytelling it is. It's an enjoyable story. And like you said, there's a lot of elements of it that really work. And it takes this very, we've talked before about how dystopian literature is about hope. And that's what we see in Wall-E. He is the one creature on which the hope of the earth rests, right? But I was just blown away by all the great storytelling elements that were incorporated into this from the very start. So in the very, very beginning, we're learning about Wall-E through the ultimate in show don't tell, because there's no dialogue.
Yeah.
So we're learning about Wall-E from everything he's doing, and we're immediately charmed by him within 60 to 120 seconds because of all the things that they are showing us about who Wall-E is. In the background, we've got this piece of music from Hello Dolly. What's it called? It's called Put On Your Sunday Clothes. And the last line of this piece of music is, "But we won't come home until we've kissed a girl." Now, I've heard that before, but this time, because I was paying attention to it as storytelling, it was totally foreshadowing what was going to happen with Wall-E.
Oh, yeah, I didn't even catch that.
He was going to go out on the town, which is like hitching a ride on the spaceship and have an adventure on the Axiom. And then he and Eve kiss, which is very cute. And then he gets to come home. And it's like, oh my gosh, that's the whole story right there.
That's
I loved it. I thought that was amazing. A couple other things that I thought was really fascinating was that, Wall-E is exists in violation of his programming in a lot of ways. He is evolved to be more than his programming, right? So he collects stuff. He finds really cool things as he's doing his work,
Yes.
cleaning up the garbage, and he takes them home and keeps them as keepsakes because he thinks they're interesting or fun or they have value to him in some way. So he's a bit of a little bit of a rebel against his programming. And we see the exact same thing in Eve when she arrives on Earth, right? The ship drops her off and she goes out and she immediately starts scanning. Scan this, scan this, scan this. And then the ship disappears and she goes zooming because she's a rebel against her programming too. She's going to go have fun. She's going to go fly.
Yeah.
And so we see that they're actually a good couple for each other because they're both rebels against their programming, which I thought was a lot of fun. I love how it takes you, like you said, this dystopian universe and turns it into a romantic comedy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it is, between two robots with absolutely no dialogue, and yet it still works. And then we get back to the ship, and then we really get to see the meat of the story of what needs to be improved and how Wall-E is going to improve it. And Wall-E's one of your, I always blank on this, what we call them, your static characters.
Yeah, stalwart hero.
Your stalwart hero. Wall-E's your stalwart hero who changes everyone around him instead of him having that arc. And it works so beautifully because he is like the last entity that you would imagine being the hero that makes a change. He is a 700-year-old beat up robot that cleans up garbage, right? The ultimate underdog.
Yeah.
And yet, because of his evolution, he's able to change everything he comes into contact with. And it's delightful. Yes. It's absolutely delightful.
He's the foreign contaminant.
Exactly. That changes everything, and for the better. It's a great. So I really enjoyed it, and looking at it through the eyes of story, I liked it even more. I was very impressed. So, was there anything you might have changed in Wall-E?
There's not much. There's things that I noticed that pulled me out a little bit because of my logical brain. Like, when the captain gets up and walks. Anytime that happens in a movie, it's like, or someone's been in a coma or hasn't walked for years, like that. It wouldn't be possible, right? But in the context of this movie, it's like it's important, I think, for showing the message of the movie and showing how people are going to change and adapt to the new world. So I can't really criticize that. Plus, it's an animated movie, and it's a lot of other movies. So there's a number of places like that, but I let that stuff go. So I don't know that I would change that. I guess at a high level, I might have shrunk a few areas a little bit, just shortened them a little bit, like in the early section with Wall-E and Eve. I think we get the setup pretty quickly, and then we kind of see more of them spending time with each other, kind of montage and things like that. Maybe I would trim just a little bit of that just to get into the rest of the story more quickly, but not much. And I don't know. I mean, I think, like you said, the writing is really good. They set up a lot of things and paid them off well. Once they get it going, you're pretty much in there. Maybe just trim a few things here and there, but overall, I think the story and the writing holds together really well. What about you? What would you improve?
With you, I think there are some things that could have been cleaned up just a little bit. I felt like we spent too much time on all of the things that you pointed out that create this sort of dystopian universe, including the screen time and the sort of non-healthy behavior of the people when we encounter them. I feel like we spent a little bit too much time there, sort of emphasizing the non-healthy behavior, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. No, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
I see what you mean.
So it felt a little heavy, not too bad. And it might have been, I think maybe in retrospect, this film came out in 2008. And so we've been now, over 10 years, over 15 years since this came out. And we've gotten a lot of that messaging over the last 15 years. And so it might be that just through the lens of the last 15 years, that feels a little heavy-handed, whereas at the time, it may not have been. Other than that, I thought it was really well done. It was all the seeds that were sown, and that's, like the end credits where all the seed sowing were then reaped at the end of the story. They laid the breadcrumbs and then fulfilled them at the end. And I think that was really tight and really well done. So there's really not much I would change.
All right.
Did you identify any themes in Wall-E?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be pretty hard to see this movie and not identify themes. It's pretty clear and obvious some of the things they're going for, but I think there's more than one thing. If I had to pick a larger, like the overarching main theme of the story, I would use the quote from the captain about life and living. I would say life is not merely about surviving, but living.
Yeah.
And I think we see that exemplified in Wall-E, right? And Eva and the people, right? They finally open their eyes and they're like, oh my gosh, there's this world here. What have I been doing? I think that's probably, for me, that would be the large theme. I think there's also a message, which you pointed out, about breaking out of your programming and expanding your mind to different possibilities. Again, we see that obviously exemplified in the two robots, but also with the humans. They're kind of going about their day-to-day routines, lost, numbing themselves with their screens, and even the captain doing the same thing. And then once he's sort of shocked out of his normalcy, he starts questioning things, and you see his curiosity kick in. He starts asking about Earth and humanity and all this stuff. So I think that's another message. And then, of course, there's, the sort of anti-dystopian message, right? Of the things that we talked about with pollution and automation and all that kind of stuff is very obvious in the background. But I think those are the main themes that I picked out. What about you?
I agree. I think those themes were very prominent and very easy to identify. And I too wrote down that line, I don't want to just survive, I want to live, because that was a very key line. And that came from the captain, as you said. And as I like to do, I like to look at, what is the theme that I can derive from our protagonist. And from Wall-E, I derived the theme of finding joy in everyday things. He found joy in a spork.
Yes.
He found joy in a Rubik's Cube. And then he found joy in Eve's company, even after she was, rendered inert by her discovery of the plant.
Yeah.
And he found joy hanging onto the spaceship and flying through space and seeing all the beauty there. He found joy dancing with her. He found joy talking to all the people on the Axiom. And then as he was dancing with Eve, they were being watched by the people, and he essentially was demonstrating to them how to find joy in their everyday. And that's, I think, the core of his stalwart hero sort of change effect, is that he was showing how to find joy in the everyday. Even the captain, with his curiosity and asking all these questions, he was getting very excited about it. And he was finding a great deal of pleasure in following these little curiosity paths. So that was the theme I pulled from it.
Oh, yeah, that is great. Thanks for bringing that up. That's a good one.
Welcome. Thank you. So what do you take away from Wall-E as a writer?
Oh man, there's a lot. I think I'm going to take away the obvious thing, like from a writer's perspective, because I think it's important. You can make an interesting story with little dialogue, because that's one of the things that I do when I write is I tend to think in dialogue first. Like I'll think about scenes and how characters interact. So that comes more naturally to me. But it's interesting to see a story with very little dialogue and how well they can pull it off. So that's my takeaway. What about you?
Mine is actually very similar. It was, this is the epitome of show, don't tell.
Yes.
So what can I learn about showing from this? So it's essentially the same thing that you took away, is how can I really level up my writing with that show, don't tell? Yeah.
Yeah, this was a phenomenal example of that.
Thank you for joining us as we talked about the story told in Wall-E. A big thank you to our Patreon supporters and all our subscribers. We're so grateful for your support and your encouragement. The Stories Told podcast is available on multiple podcast platforms, and we thank you for liking and subscribing or following, depending on where you're listening. It may not be a big deal to you, but it means a lot to us. If you have a favorite book, movie, or TV series you'd like to suggest for the podcast, leave a comment on the YouTube channel, and that link is in the show notes. You can find Michael Grayford at michaelgrayford.com and E.W. Barnes at 1000years.com, and those links are also in the show notes. Join us next time as we talk about the story told in the 1985 film Lady Hawk. Thanks so much, Mike. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you.
And we'll see you next time on the Stories Told podcast.